I'm excited to continue our Women's History Month by looking at Björk this week.
I know it's going to be fascinating because I really haven't had a whole lot of prior experience to Björk before this review.
Yeah, I'm hoping for one thing though. We're gonna have a fun time doing this review, but yeah, I there's just one thing I hope that can happen here.
And what would that be?
I hope that we can synchronize our feelings.
Yeah, that would be nice.
And welcome back, everybody, to the best music podcast on all sides of planet Earth, from Ukraine to Uganda. This podcast is called Hey Listen to This, and it is hosted by two dashingly good-looking men who share the same middle name. I am the one. I am the only. I am the one who knocks Ryan James Kearns.
And I am the one, the only, the I haven't seen enough Breaking Bad to make a reference, Matthew James Durzik. And for those of you who don't know what a Hey Listen to This is, every week we look at each other either through the magic of technology or the magic of existence and basically say to each other, hey, listen to this. And that means breaking down an album track by our favorite artist or a relevant artist or both. And in this case, for the month of March, we are doing a dive into Women's History Month with albums that are not only led by females, but about the female experience. So, Ryan, with that regard, what did we talk about last week?
We talked about the debut album from Cyndi Lauper called She's So Unusual. And for me, being an incredibly, inexperienced listener to one Cyndi Lauper, other than the big singles off of that album, which were Time After Time and Girls Just Wanna Have Fun. I had a good time, checking out the album, songs like She Bop and Yeah, and a couple of the other tracks were a good time for me. But yeah, it was a good time last week covering Cyndi Lauper.
I agree. It was a very fun album to listen to, and definitely one for listening if you have not listened to it, dear listener. So with that in mind, it is now your turn, Ryan, and what are we talking about this week?
So this week, we're going to be covering a very important figure in the experimental music scene, and that figure that we're going to be covering is Björk. And while I could have chosen one of her bigger albums, like Homogenic or Vespertine as the album that we're going to cover, or Post or Debut. But yeah, the album that we're going to be covering this week from Björk is Vulnicura. And that album was released in 2015. And the reason why we're covering this specific record is that this was my introduction to Björk. So I figured it's been many a moon since I, checked out the record. And I put it up for contention here.
I appreciate that. And yeah, this is an interesting one because I will say, before Ryan answers this question, for those of you wondering what is a Björk, I know the answer to that question could be kind of loaded. But yeah, for those of you who are not experienced and are curious as to what we're going to talk about, there's a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to try to at least keep the introduction about Björk and what's led to her journey up to the point and why she wrote this specific record that we're covering here today. Try to keep it at the nuts and bolts here. So Björk, she was born November 21st, 1965. She's a Scorpio.
Ah.
And like I said, she's one of the most influential pioneers in the electronic and experimental music scene. And alongside of that, just her ability to be an amazing composer on the string front is also something that needs to be noted. This specific album that we're covering here today, there is a only strings version of it out there. So Fun fact about that: Björk began her career at the age of 11, and she really started getting international recognition as the lead singer of the band The Sugar Cubes. That group disbanded in 1992. Nothing really, it doesn't really pave way to what Björk is nowadays to, really talk about the Sugar Cubes. But what really got, fame and a lot of groundswell around her going is that solo music run that immediately began afterward. She had there was a handful of albums that were released afterward that really started to build up the groundswell for her. Like I mentioned, Homogenic and Vespertine, and you mentioned Post, and we also talked about the debut. Like they are each very beautiful albums, and they each have their own little fan base. If some people would say, if you were to type into Google and ask hey, what is the best Björk album? There isn't a consensus this album here. The two albums that I did identify as the most highly regarded albums were the ones I keep mentioning: Homogenic and Vespertine. One of the tracks off of Homogenic that I'm highlighting here is one of her probably most well-known songs, is All Is Full of Love. And that song specifically is known as one of her most beautiful songs whatsoever. If you have not listened to that song, I highly recommend that to you and, the listener right now. Mm-hmm. And it has a very fantastic, very forward-thinking video. And in Vespertine, the song I highlighted off of that's it's most well-known for, or one of the highlights of that album, is Pagan Poetry. That song is very, very forward-thinking, and it's one of her most iconic songs. So, yeah, that's a very brief, summary about Björk, of how, she, came into the music scene, who she is, and, what caused her to get, this huge following. Now, for those of you who are, listening right now and, wonder, what makes Björk a little bit different, is her vocal delivery. It's not for everyone. It's very we talked about this in a review, maybe when we were doing, what was I gonna say? When we did the Eve's Tumor review, it's a very community theater, feelings. I got feelings. It's kind of like that. And if you can get past the vocal delivery, because it's not usually the best, there's music there. Obviously, we'll talk about the specific record here, so I don't want to give away my thoughts and feelings about Vulnicura right now. But essentially, Vulnicura, this album was highly anticipated because there was a 3-year gap between Vulnicura and the previous album, Biophilia, and that album had it was a highly successful album for Björk because the way that that album really got into it really gained a lot of press, is Björk was able to tap into creating an app to drive groundswell for that album. A lot of people like that album. And this album here, Vulnicura, it means cure for wounds. And what wound are we talking about? The wound of heartbreak. And so, this album was written in 2013, the year Björk and her partner Matthew Barney broke up. And yeah, essentially this album in a nutshell is about the breakup and the healing of the breakup. And there's a couple other tracks tacked on at the end that we'll talk about. But yeah, that's basically Vulnicura. During the press cycle, Björk broke into VR in order to promote the album. She was the very first artist to perform in a VR space in promotion for this album, so that's pretty cool. And this my experience with Vulnicura and how it came into my crosshairs as a music listener is. Can you take a guess?
I'm going to take the most wild of guesses, because when I searched for this album, it was one of the first things that popped up. Would it be one Mr. Anthony Fantano that inspired you?
Absolutely, my dude. So the record was released in 2015. This was pretty much like a couple years after, we graduated college, and this really came across my crosshairs because of one. Anything that Anthony Fantano was highlighting as a very positive album, I mean, even nowadays, I generally check out.
Right, you give it a chance.
And with Björk, I knew that she was a very important figure in music history. So yeah, I became attached to this album. Now I will say, admittedly, outside of Vulnicura, I really haven't checked out much of Björk's stuff prior to doing this review. So albums like Vespertine and Homogenic, Debut, Post. I've listened to some singles off of it, from her. But in terms of saying, oh yeah, man, oh yeah, this album or this album, no, and I don't own anything from her on vinyl. So, but yeah, that's basically Björk in a nutshell. And my relationship with her.
My relationship with Björk is quite literally this review and listening to the album for this review, if I'm going to be completely honest. My only other exposure to Björk is as sort of, and I hate to say this, but kind of almost as a punchline sometimes, because a lot of people just see her as this weird, pixie-like, avant-garde artist. So weird and out there, she makes Yoko Ono look like Katy Perry. But I don't agree with that, and we'll get into the reasons why, and I'm very glad you sort of painted the picture of what she's doing, because not only, like you said, is she a composer, but she's also touching on themes that, hey, we deal with a lot on this show, and a lot of times is dealt with in music, which is a breakup. There are many great breakup albums out there, why not Björk? So, that's pretty much all I have to say about it. I am ready to rock and roll with Vulnicura.
So, yeah, kicking off the review here with the opening track, Stone Milker. And, yeah, so one thing that I'm going to specify whenever we're talking about, these specific tracks, in the album's, booklet, they label, these tracks as, hey, this is X amount of months before, X amount of months after, with the exception of a couple tracks, which... when it happens, I'll get into it. Yeah. But so this track here, it's labeled as 9 months before the breakup. So yeah, right off of the gate, we get a very beautiful track to open up the album. Just the way that the strings just come together, and Björk's vocal delivery can be grating, but it works well within this space. And yeah, it just, the way that everything just works together opens up the listener and myself to such a pleasant experience to come into the album. And one thing that I'm going to mention is that there's also a third element, the drum machine in this track. And we're going to have several other moments of the drum machine changing up and interacting with the strings and Björk's vocals. One thing I'm going to mention about the drum machine, specifically in relation to this album, the way that I, when I was doing my research, apparently the way that the drum machine is sounding and how it's how fast it's going and how it's basically operating is supposed to be a representation of Björk's heart and emotions at the time. So, yeah. It knowing that fact kind of changed my opinion about one of the tracks here in the album, but going back into the track as a whole, just the one moment that I really did like is that sonic shift that occurs where Björk is starting to croon about emotions, and that's basically in the first chorus where she's saying, hey, show me emotional respect, and she's kind of really feeling the word respect there. It's a very beautiful moment. And also that line that I used to introduce this episode. Hey, I wish to synchronize our feelings. That's a great line, considering what's going on in Bjork's mindset in the relationship at this time, because it just feels like, hey, we're out of sync. Like, we've been in this relationship, but yeah, I'm just trying to get like emotions out of you. I'm trying to have you meet me in the middle here, but it's not working. I just want to synchronize our feeling, but it's like trying to milk a stone. Hey.
Hard.
But yeah, it's a fantastic way to open up the record. Did not land in my top 3. And for the record, I have a top 3 and a bottom nothing here.
I have a top 2 and a bottom 1, and this did not land in either category for me, but I do agree it is a strong start to the album. Like you said right away, the drums and the strings create such a... I had it listed as a serene atmosphere. It's a little on the floaty side, but that's not a bad thing whatsoever in this context. And again, having not been used to Björk singing, this was a great introduction to that as well, because in traditional, Western pop rock music, there tends to be this, ideology of you have to rhyme lines a certain way and follow a certain beat, and, the ABAB or AABB method of songwriting. Björk doesn't care about any of that. But what she cares about is being more intent to follow the melody that she's composed, putting the lyrics in there however they come across. And that, I think, is a very strong way to present yourself as well. Because it comes across more as almost like poetry in a sense, like poetry for the sake of, getting your words out there and following verse rather than just, la, 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 tifi-ta, tifi-ta. And you're right about the lyrics. They seek companionship. They seek, trying to work with the partner. I think there were a couple of times where I thought they didn't line up completely well. Like, even for the poetry and the avant-garde level of singing, there were a couple of times where I was kind of like, and that couple of kept it from being a top 3 track of mine. But aside from that, it definitely is a strong starting point. Again, composed very beautifully, and very much a strong introduction to Björk for me.
You were right on the money whenever you're saying, like, composed beautifully. And one thing that I'm just going to make a note here, like, it just seems like with this album here and, like, what Björk tends to bring to the table, like, she's bringing compositions as opposed to, like, just, tracks and songs. Like, in my mind, like, I can't make the case for some of the tracks here, but a lot of the tracks here are just like, hey, we're witnessing, like, almost like, I hate to say it, like an opera of sorts, because, like, you get different movements, you get Björk singing about emotions. And like, one lyric I do want to highlight before we boogie on over to Line Song is whenever she's talking about, like, hey, she's questioning, what is it that I have that makes me feel your pain? Like milking a stone to get you to stay. Like, like that right there, like, you can really feel the struggle and the heartbreak that Björk is going through. And here's the sad thing about it, man. Like, this is 9 months before the breakup. Like, how long has this other partner been basically like, I don't know. Like,
yeah.
But, yeah, fantastic. Like, it up until today, like, Stone Milker was in my top 3, but when I did my last listen through of the album, prior to doing this review here, another track kicked it out.
Understandable. And also, before we move on to Line Song, the fact that you said it's 9 months before the breakup, like, understanding, like, your thought of how long was Mr. Barney already sort of distant from Björk, but the fact that it's 9 months ahead of time, it feels like a slow car crash that's taking place, and it just thinking about that sucks. But moving on to Line Song, once again we move into the next part of the evolution. What is the timestamp for this track?
5 months before.
5 months before. So here we get a very strong lyrical presence about wondering if whatever the other side is going through. I think, once again, Björk is trying to find that connection with her lover. And right out of the gate, you get lyrics such as, maybe he will come out of this, maybe he won't. Somehow I'm not too bothered either way. So, in a sense, this is Björk trying to empathize with what the other one's going through, while also sort of starting to set the wheels in motion for herself that, hey, this might be happening, and maybe instead of breaking down and letting myself go into the atmosphere, try to cope with it, try to understand with it. And the lyrics that stood out to me, obviously, were the first verse, which is, Vietnam vet comes after the war, lands in my house, this wild lion doesn't fit in this chair. And then you kind of get this idea of, this guy is returning from the war, or the war with oneself, and trying to find themselves. And maybe he was trying to battle his own demons of whether he loved Björk or someone else, or whether he loved himself, or what the case is. And as someone who just recently watched the movie American Sniper, which is a great movie, by the way. I know it was directed by Clint Eastwood, and it's about the military, and you may feel like, it's just jingoistic BS. It's actually a really good movie. And it does talk a lot in there about how a soldier dealing with PTSD can have the toll on someone else. And that's what I thought of the first time I heard this. So the lyrics on this track are great. The music I didn't quite find as compelling on this particular track. I thought a lot of the phrasing that Björk was going for on this track did come across a little bit more forced than it did on Stonemilker. Not in, a completely turn-off sense, but once again, I found myself saying, but not so much that it's my bottom song. It's also not my top two.
I like this song a lot.
Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna just come out of the gate and say it's my second favorite song on the album.
Number 2. All right.
So you were talking about how some of the phrasing seems forced, and some of the music didn't land quite as well for you. That is what sold me on this track here. It does begin with this distorted, warbly kind of voice starting out, but throughout the track, you get Björk and the instrumentation just masterfully playing with tension, and it's centered around the phrasing it's centered around the phrase that's repeated throughout this track, and that is, maybe he will come out of this loving me. Björk says that so much that she's almost trying to convince herself of that, and any single time that phrase is said in Lying Song, the instrumentation just kind of gently grinding up on you, and you can really feel the tension. It's so thick with 3 Ks that you can cut it with a knife. And just outside of that, one section lyrically that I really did like, that gives weight to the argument of Björk going to more of a frantic kind of state of mind, is, should I throw oil on one of these moves, but which one? The joy peak, the humor peak, the frustration peak, anything peak for clarity? She's just trying to find an answer, trying to get her partner to come out of this funk that he's in. And yeah, I really don't have much more else to say that. The drum machine with the strings and the synths doing random licks after the intro is a nice moment for me, and how the strings echo Björk's vocals when she's doing lines, that's a great moment for me. That's a kink for me on the musical side.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it seems here the phrasing and just the delivery might be a little bit off on a conventional sense when it comes to Björk, but it seems like Björk is just trying to throw herself into the music and just embody it and just really just become a part of it, as opposed to just being her own separate part of it. So yeah, Lion Song, as you can tell, I dig it a lot.
And I completely respect that. Again, I did not have this as my bottom song. It's also not my top two, but it's not a bad song. And I will say, from a somewhat conventional standpoint, I think the song actually starts out pretty great with that a cappella start was really, really nice. Again, just something about the way it evolved just kind of, again, didn't completely like turn me off and say, I don't want to listen to this anymore. But I was just kind of like, and yeah, there are songs that are coming up that did not make me think that, and we will get to those.
So, I think we've talked enough about Lion Song here. You ready to go on? You ready for me to kick it over to History of Touches?
Absolutely.
This is a curveball here. Compared to like what we had to deal with, well, not deal with, but what we were presented with Stone Milker and Lion Song. Like here, everything is basically hollow and it's very cold. And like, this was the track that I mentioned. Oh, well, I may give like a little bit of foreshadowing that it helped me appreciate what this track was bringing to the table, knowing that drum machine and that hollow, like, disconnected production was supposed to represent, and that was supposed to be, like, Björk's emotions during this time. So, like, essentially, this track is 3 months before the breakup, and essentially it's supposed to lead us right into the breakup. Like, and, yeah, at this point, Björk is just, like, feeling very hollow, very disconnected, and, like, it's one of the shorter tracks off the LP, but yeah, like it's just so cold, so tingy, and like essentially, this track is basically about like Björk trying to wake her partner up at night and trying to like remind her partner why she loves him and trying to rekindle that love. I mean, that's exemplified with lyrics of with us here at this moment, the history of touches, every single archive compressed into a second, all with us here as I wake you up. And like what even made the song like, made me appreciate this song a little bit more was the concept of waking up her lover, and considering what we just went through with Lion Song where she was saying, "Oh, maybe he will come out of this, like coming out, waking up." Like there's a clear parallel there, but yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say. That I mean, from a out of context of the rest of the album, History of Touches probably could have been a bottom track for me, I'm going to be honest with you. But knowing all those little details, like, makes me appreciate the track a little bit more. It's not one of my favorite tracks off the album. And it couldn't have been because there's all the other tracks here, with the exception of a couple, like, are clearly better. But I respect what History of Touches is.
I respect what it is, too. I'm probably a little bit higher on this song than you are, but maybe just a little, because I agree. It is a surprisingly cut and dry mode for Björk here. Again, there's really not a whole lot of instrumental backing. It's very sparse, and like you said, it's intentionally sparse. And I'm very glad you sort of painted that picture of it being sort of this cross between her trying to wake her lover up and trying to rekindle that flame one more time. Because I have in my notes that this is basically, for reasons that are not necessarily fun, this is basically Björk being horny on main. Because this is a very graphic song in a sexual nature, and I think that's part of why she's going with this idea, sort of a last-ditch effort to try to rekindle flame. And a lot of that is based in, again, natural attraction. You like your partner because, hey, what's up? You want to do the thing. And for those of you who just decided to turn this off, I apologize. But in all seriousness, like, it's very, like, sparse, trying to, like, get to the ground root of the issue. I will say when she drops that F-bomb, it might have been the softest F-bomb I've ever heard in the history of music. But that, again, is just, Björk singing and everything. Again, it wasn't a track that really, super stood out to me on a overall level, but I just respect it for what it is, just like you, man.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, that probably could have been a bottom track for me, and it could probably brought down the ratings. I think before diving into the lyrical content, just the track by itself, I gave it, I think, a 7 out of 10 mentally, but even at that, that's not enough for a bottom track for me. So, but yeah, I'm ready to move on to Black Lake, if you are.
I am ready to move on to Black Lake, and earlier I was mentioning that there were tracks on this album where I didn't quite go with anything that Björk was doing. This is one of those tracks. This track, once again, has a very somewhat minimalistic but stronger string presence on this track. Most of this track is essentially everything, whether it be the drums, the strings, and Björk herself, just working so well in sync with one another as she is basically abandoning all types of conventional music structure and just basically presenting the lyrics as, I wouldn't even say lyrics, these are just thoughts set to a melody at this point, and what thoughts these are. Right out of the gate, the first verse of "Our love was my womb, but our bond has broken. My shield is gone, my protection is taken. I am one wound, my pulsating body, suffering being." Now, from what I'm reading here, this is 2 months after. So this is right after the breakup and right in the thick of Björk realizing that everything that was there is gone. And now she is trying to deal with this. And it's very obvious that she is not okay with it. Verses like, "My soul torn apart, my spirit is broken into the fabric of all he is woven. I did it for love, I honored my feelings, you betrayed your own heart, corrupted that organ." And probably the darkest one, which I think is verse 6, "Family was always our sacred mutual mission, which you abandoned." This is basically Björk saying, screw you and the horse you rode in on. We were supposed to be together forever, and this is what you did to me. This is just, and again, it for those who are into conventional music and not necessarily ready for the avant-garde, I understand that the phrasing and the sort of free-flowing nature of her thoughts to the melody might come off a little off-putting. It didn't for me in this case. I think the song is very beautiful. I think the song is very complex. I think the song is very dark and confessional. I think the drums halfway through are a very nice touch that add a bit more of a sort of layer to what you're already listening to. I think the way that it comes off uneven, I know you said earlier, the way it did on Lion Song sort of turned you on a little bit. It did for me on this track because it felt deliberately uneven, just like the feelings after a breakup. And I'm just going to come out and say it. This is my favorite song on the album.
Me too!
Hell yeah!
We did it, Joe!
We did it, Joe!
But, yeah, I'm not going to dive into too much more of the lyrical content of what you've already covered, because you did an excellent job highlighting just the absolute poetry that's being delivered by Björk here. My favorite line that I want to shout out, though, is in verse 2, where she's saying, "My heart is enormous lake, black with potion. I am blind, drowning in this ocean." That line right there is just... It encapsulates the utter emptiness and the heartbroken feeling that Björk was going through at this time. I can't think of anything else other than, somebody just casually singing, "Kill me, but even if you ask for death," this song, that lyric right there is basically encapsulating what it feels to not even only just to die, but just to not exist anymore. I know that's the same thing for the sake of redundancy. But like that line just really floored me. And just you talk about I talk about like the strings and like a couple of these tracks here. Here they are beautifully executed. Like just the simple motif that they keep doing, and it goes throughout the whole track, and even at the end where Björk's vocals just cut out, like absolutely chef's kiss and like execution with that. And yeah, like the drum machine, like you mentioned, like I did like what it was doing, and I do like how if you really go at listening to this album with thinking that the drum machine is supposed to like represent Björk's heartbeat, like at some moments the drum machine goes away, like her heart's dead, and then like she starts to get fiery up and she starts to kick herself back up, and then it goes back down. But yeah, like, and another thing that I really do love about this track here is I talked about it in the Cure episode. I talked about it in like a couple other reviews that we've done. Is like there's plenty enough moments here where the instrumentation's allowed to breathe, and that is absolutely breathtaking, absolutely beautiful. But yeah, just this right here, Black Lake, like this is the centerpiece of the album for me, and obviously for you too, because it's your favorite track. Like I can't, like when I think of like art and music, like this is an excellent representation of it. Like I just can't say enough good things about Black Lake.
I can't either. I mean, it is a great track. I will say, like, if you listen to this album and take nothing else away from it, take away this song is it is that good. Because it just, again, everything is executed so beautifully. And I know you've talked about before, something I noticed, you mentioned at the end where it just sort of cuts out just her and her vocals, and that's it. I remember you talking about it during the Future Teens episode on DTFL, where those kind of moments are really just a sort of, a musician and a vocalist at their most stark. It's like the fact they won't have the cojones to put themselves out there and be that confessional musically as well as lyrically. Like, that's a huge thing.
And you got to think about it from this point. I'll make this one last point, then we can move over to family. But like Björk at this time, she's already a well-established artist. Like the way that I had you pick this album for review is there was no singles here. Like this is just an expression of the human existence that she went through, and that's absolutely beautiful. I absolutely love it when bands and artists do that.
Agreed. And they just, they don't give a damn about the hits. They just want to get something out there for the sake of it being out there, for their sake and just for the sake of it being part of their story. So I'm ready to move on to family.
It's a family song! Anyways. Don't hug me, I'm scared.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You're like, where did that come from? So, yeah. So, family. This was one of the tracks where it took me a couple of different times to, like, really sink my teeth into in terms of what it was bringing to the table. But, like, yeah, it's a really good song. Like, how it starts out with the, for lack of a better term, like an Eastern influence on the strings and the synths, like, that's a really good moment for me. And the way that Björk's vocals are layered here, but not just on top of each other, it's like they're coming in and out, and they're completing their own phrases, but they're overlapping each other. Like, that's a great moment. I like that a lot. This is not my third favorite track on the album. I'll let you know before I do anything else. And yeah, so, and once a change-up occurs, when you get the more traditional, like, melodic strings coming in, like, that's a great moment. And just another solid track here in terms of, like, what Björk's bringing to the table. And timeline-wise, this is 6 months after the breakup. So, and contextually, this song is basically about Björk mourning her lost family. And here's a fact that I learned whenever I was doing this review based on the context of what she keeps talking about losing her family. Hey, you abandoned this mission of family. I thought they didn't have a kid together. Oh no, they did.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we'll get into that aspect with the next track. But yeah, I was just kind of a little bit taken back. I'm like, oh, but yeah, just she was thinking about it from more of the traditional hey, this is a family, and not a divorce family. So yeah, and my lyrical highlight here on Family is just the opening lines of when she's paying respects for her loss of her family and how there's no love between the mother and father. That's a great moment. You can just really picture for those of you who have seen SpongeBob SquarePants, where Squidward goes into the graveyard and he's carrying flowers and he's just paying respects to his dreams and he starts to cry. That's what I pictured in a less serious sense, I guess. So
I was not expecting that a breed between Björk and SpongeBob.
But yeah, Family, another fantastic track. It could have crept into my top 3, but once we get to my third favorite track, I'll explain why. That completes my trilogy. So
that's fair. And again, I do appreciate Björk trying to make the this whole idea of going through a breakup, especially the dissolution of a family unit, sound as dark and as mind-melting as it is for someone who's never been through that and dealing with it. I think the lyrics on this track are great. I think the way she, repeats the phrase of, father, mother, child, and, is basically saying, well, what do I do now? How am I going to be able to get this back? And I know I can't, so what am I going to be able to do? Do I have to call a higher spirit? Do I have to burn incense? Whatever the case is. Unfortunately, this is my least favorite track on the album because I felt, again, when I kind of went into this again, sort of expecting something weird and wild and chaotic and maybe a little, too much of that for me, and here was the one track I think that ended up being the case. I just felt like you talk about the layered vocals, I thought that was kind of a bit of a turn-off for me, just how it was sort of wall-to-wall, just sort of, almost, for lack of a better term, noise. And it felt uneasy in a way that didn't come across to me as incredibly artistic. I get it. Trust me, I get it and I appreciate it, but this track is just not for me.
And I totally respect that. I am not gonna say Björk and this track is for everybody because it's genuinely not. I mean, it's experimental electronic music. It's supposed to do out there kind of things, and sometimes you can gravitate towards stuff, and sometimes you can be that is just an old man wielding a chainsaw, and I don't want to have anything to do with that old man because I'm scared.
Right, or the musical equivalent of that. Quick side story: one time I went to the now lost Blue Valley Cafe in Rochester for a show, and the opening act was a dude wearing a bunny mask playing distorted bass and a drummer who was just shouting. That was the opening act.
Oh, and that's somebody's kink right there.
It is somebody's kink. It wasn't everybody's kink though, because at the end of the set there was a small smattering of applause, and I'm paraphrasing here for the sake of censorship. But the bass was why the hell are you clapping? So, again, sometimes the music's not for everybody. Again, I really have appreciated much of the album at this point. And again, the lyrics on this track are really good, but the sound just wasn't quite for me.
So, I do have a question for you, though.
What would that question be?
So, I know, family wasn't your thing. And...
Go on.
And Yeah, that's totally fine. You're not allowed to like Family if you don't want to.
The song, for the
record. If the listener out there is really liking what we're bringing to the table, and like in an indirect sense, giving them musical recommendations through our journey here, what are some ways that they can help support us? Keeping on here.
The easiest way they can do that is by reminding Canada that they are their own proud country. And then after that, finding us on your favorite social media platform of choice, whether it be Facebook or Threads or Blue Sky or Instagram or your favorite podcasting platform of choice. And we're on Spotify, Apple Music.
Well, my podcasting platform of choice is Pocket Cast.
Okay, thank you for reminding me what it was called. And we're also on YouTube. If you want to watch our videos or put them in the background, whatever the case may be, feel free to do that. If you're on YouTube, give us a like, comment, and subscribe. If you find us anywhere else, make sure to share it with your friends or share it to your social media feeds. The moniker is TT Hey Listen on all of our accounts. And if you want to reach us directly, we have a email account, which is ttheylisten@gmail.com. And that is where you can tell us what we did right, tell us what we did wrong, tell us what you would like us to do. Maybe we may have you on for a future episode, who knows, or take some of your suggestions. But for those who have done that so far and gotten us to where we are, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, we're not sponsored by anybody. We're not going to do any ads for, Shadow Raid Legends or Manscaped. We're just a couple of dudes. So we are happy that you're joining us on our musical journey through artists past, present, and maybe even the future.
Shout out to Raid Shadow Legends, man.
The ultimate legend.
So, going into the last, the back half of not the last leg, but the back leg of the record here, with the song Not Get. And, yeah, so, contextually, this is 11 months after the breakup. And, yeah, we get another track here, at least starting out with the atonal strings and Björk's vocals really just blending together. It was solid for me, and I was really taken back by how the drum machine here adds such an interesting element. And this is where I discovered that the drum machine is supposed to act as a representation of Björk's heart. So that helped me appreciate the track a bunch more. And for me, the thing that really sold me on the track is how the strings and the vocals come together whenever she's asking, hey, love will keep us safe from death, love will keep us safe from death, we'll keep her safe from death. The repetition of death and just how ominous that sounded. That it was incredibly dark, incredibly beautiful. I just love that so much. And basically, there was a section here where it just seems like Björk's wailing, and that landed well on my ears. And, yeah, contextually, Not Get is Björk really just processing more grief. But here, it's an interesting element where she's not only acknowledging her own grief, but there's a moment where she acknowledges the pain in her ex-partner, and that's an incredibly mature perspective in terms of writing a song like this. And also another thing that sold me on the track is the moment where she's talking about them working together to save their daughter from death, and death being a life of just not growing up with the proper guidance. For that lifted the track up so far that this is my third favorite track on the record. So Not Get, it completes the trilogy here.
Well, it completes my top two. This is my second favorite song on the album, and I'm right there with you on a lot of respects. Once again, the strings are a bit uneasy, but at this time they were uneasy in a sense I liked. I also like that militant pan flute that comes out of freaking nowhere in the track. I thought that was a nice touch. I thought the music and phrasing were a lot more structured on here than it was on Family. I think Björk's singing was great, and I think the lyrics are great too. Very strong, very poetic. Particularly examples like verse 3, we carry the same wound but have different cures, similar injuries but opposite remedies. Like, my goodness, like, that's such a great line. And yeah, like you say, this is just her basically, once again, dealing with, the aftershock. And at this point, it feels a little more, I think the fact that it sounds more upbeat, for lack of a better term, is in a sense her normalizing, or at least sort of stepping away from the edge of what Family was and what Black Lake was. Like, that was Björk at her darkest moments. Like, here, she still carries some of that bitterness, but it's a more afterthought, more of a logicized sense, where she's basically realizing all this heartbreak as fact, and then just realizing, okay, well, I've said my piece, what are you going to do about it now? And that's where she's at. So I think the song is great. Again, second favorite track on the album for me, man.
Man, we're in alignment, man. We really synchronized our feelings for the most part.
For lack of a better part, we did. So maybe the real heartbreak was the friends we made along the way. That was stupid. Let's move on.
All right. So I'll let you kick off the next song, Adam Dance. And for contextual sake, this is the last song within the story traditionally of like the wound and the healing of the wound.
Yes, and this track is probably the first on the back half which deals with the healing. My very first note about it was ultimately the story of how Björk got her groove back. Because this is basically a love song. It's a love song, or at the very least an attraction song, in which Björk is basically trying to court someone else and essentially present it. To me, this song broke down in two halves. The first is wanting to do the Adam dance, and then the second half is the Adam dance in a sense. I did kind of prefer the first half over the second, but appreciated both in its own right. The lyrics, once again, are fantastic. The line that really stood out to me, as somewhat cliche as it is compared to the unconventional nature of Björk's lyrics, her saying "no one is a lover alone" really stuck with me, man. Like, that's just a great line in and of itself. Did not land in my top two, obviously. Obviously, that ship has sailed, but this was a nice track, and I sort of saw myself hearing this and thinking, you know what, you go, girl, you do your thing, you get back out there and get that man or woman, no judgment.
So yeah, I really wish that the whole album would have ended with Adam Dance, because like this is such a proper conclusion to the story, and the way that it it would have ended off the album would have been on such a high note. And this concept of like the Adam dance that Matt was talking about, like for me, I came away from the track thinking that it's more about like how we each impact each other, whether we're not just a lover or we're a friend, or if we're just that cashier at Walmart that's like giving you the death stare for checking out at 3 a.m. in the morning buying a bag of flaming hot Cheetos.
Remember 3 a.m. at Walmart?
Oh man, but like we all impact each other, and that's the real messaging here. Lyrically, one section I do want to highlight that really kind of just caps off Björk's journey and finishes it off on such a high note is her talking about, I'm dancing towards transformation, learning by love to open it up, let this ugly wound breathe. So just learning how to embrace love and just dancing towards just change, because while you can wallow in self-pity And it's a very important thing to recognize your emotions, ladies and gentlemen. Like, you can't stay there forever. Like, eventually time does heal wounds in one way or another. Like, I'm not trying to diminish anything. Things will change. Like, life does move on. Life does change. But in terms of a songwriting and a compositional standpoint, Adam Dance, I just really appreciated, like, several moments here. Just, there was another moment where the layering of vocals and how they were doing contrasting lines. That was a very beautiful moment for me. And just another great section is like when this could have been like the Adam Dance itself happening, where it's like warbly vocals accompanied by strings and a drum machine. That was a really beautiful moment. And for me, that, like, I felt like at some moments here, like, the track was trying to, like, wrap up and, like, bring different elements and different textures that we found throughout the whole record and tie it up into a bow. Really great ending there. Yeah. This track, again, falls into the bucket of, like, falling just short of being in my top 3. I felt like I said that about, like, almost, like, half the tracks here.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, the good song bucket is quite full this go around for you, but not understandable. I mean, it is understandable because this is a solid song as well. Again, the lyrics are great, the music's good, and it's definitely a nice addition to the story as it's been told so far.
So, moving over to Mouth Mantra, if you are ready.
Yes, the lost Neil Cicerega album that has not been released. In all seriousness, though, Mouth Mantra, I'll kick this one off.
Yeah.
This song is a very interesting concept in and of itself, which is, it's a song about being unable to sing. Because unbeknownst to me until I did my research, Björk had vocal cord surgery, which left her unable to sing for a while. And, as a singer, that has to suck because, hey, that's your bread and butter. And in the case of Björk, also her art and vision. So to have that taken away for a while sucks. And much like that, this song is uneasy and precise, much like vocal cord surgery. Because she's just trying to comprehend this idea of, hey, I've been singing my whole life, now I can't, what the hell? So just on a conceptual idea, I really like the fact that this song exists. Execution-wise, though, it's fine. Like, I wasn't, like, blown away by it, but I did appreciate it for what it was. I will say the laser noises throughout the song are a nice touch because you can imagine that being part of the surgery.
Yeah.
And just shining a light in your mouth, or you're doing like, ah! But, yeah, no, this is a solid song. I will say it does feel like an outlier on this album. Obviously, this might be, chronologically correct. I'm not 100% sure. I'll have you double check on that for me. But just the idea of it being sort of not a song about the relationship does feel a little weird. And honestly, you almost feel like this song, even though it's not directly about the relationship and probably wasn't even written for this story, could have even fit better had it been bumped up right around maybe before Family, sort of as a dark parallel of, hey, now that we're out of love, I can't even sing anymore. As much of a sort of fabrication as that would be, it could have made for a more compelling story. But at the same time, like you said, this is an album with no singles. This was simply meant to tell a story, to get words and thoughts out there in the way that she felt right. So I, pass it on to Björk and, give her the benefit of the doubt that this is what she wanted.
Yeah, so after doing a quick Google here, she had vocal surgery in 2012. Her and Matt split up in 2013.
So this was before that.
Yeah, so...
Okay.
And, it's a fine song in its own right, but, I'm right there with you, man. As cliche as that phrase is with our podcast, because I feel like we say that a lot, it's almost like its own drinking game.
Yeah.
So...
One you will not win, by the way.
But yeah, like this track, and I'm just gonna say Quicksand as well. They definitely feel like outliers with what otherwise could have been a near perfect record for me. But yeah, like even though the song is about her vocal cord surgery, like if you really just kind of take the lyrics, like there was vocal sadness, I was separated from what I can do, what I'm capable of, like that could you can easily make a parallel of that and like place this track here earlier in the record and have this be like another like, hey, I'm getting over the heartbreak, but like I was vocal sadness, I was separated from what I can do and what I'm capable of. Like there's an excellent parallel there, and maybe that's why she included it in the back end of the record. But yeah, like the little laser noises that you were talking about, like I did appreciate that. That was a highlight for me. And it almost felt like a kind of like a dubstep kind of breakdown a little bit. And yeah, like other than that, like there was moments that you do get the strings echoing the vocal lines that Bjork is laying down. But overall, like Mouth Mantra definitely did not have the ability to pop into my top three, but I really appreciate what it was bringing to the table.
I did too, and again, I think it does. Once again, we're talking about Bjork sort of presenting this and just getting it out there. It's like, by the way, I had vocal cord surgery, and this is how I'm feeling. Does it fit in contextually with everything else? Not really. Does it have to? Not really. It's her choice. This is what she went with. And it does, again, like you say, feel like an outlier, but not a terrible.
Yeah, and I mean that kind of goes to like what Bjork was doing with this record as a whole. Like, did she create any like Well, we keep saying like there's some singles here, but she didn't write any songs with the intentions of it being like a catchy single. Like this is just a human class of like a human class. This is just a class on human expression. Mm-hmm. So, and like she was just telling her own story here. So, like, props to her for doing that.
I'm laughing because I'm now envisioning. So, for the last few years, you know how Taylor Swift has sort of like taken back her masters and released her own versions of like her own music without all the studio production. Yeah. Part of me wants to know the timeline where Bjork does that backwards and like just presents a phone to Kira to Jack Antonoff and be like, here you go. Could you imagine?
Oh man, can you just imagine dragons?
Okay, that's a bridge too far.
Alright, so I'm just gonna jump into the final track on the record, Quicksand. And this is another outlier track here. And yeah, kind of like for me, the way that the drum machine was operating here and like how Bjork's vocals were sampled almost like synth hits, it kind of reminded me of like Death Grips in a sense without like the aggressive rapping. And maybe that's what like they actually Death Grips and Bjork did actually like collaborate on an album where like her vocals were used as like like the main instrumentation. So yeah, fun fact about that. Shout out Death Grips. I think they're breaking up though. But anyways, yeah, for me, like it's a very interesting song. And I mean, I do enjoy the sections here where Bjork's vocals do come to the front and they become more of the focus. And yeah, like this song is basically about like the relationship that Bjork had with her mother because like it was this song was written a month after her mom had a heart attack, so she was probably examining the relationship she had with her. I did dig the moments where Bjork was exploring themes of like how mothers impact their daughters, and there's a great line within the track where how she's encouraging others not to give up despite their current environment. So almost like a backhanded thing against her mother, but I mean I can't speak to Bjork and Bjork's mother's relationship. I'm just reading what I'm seeing here. But and just overall, the track does end up unresolved, which is not really an upsetting thing for me. But yeah, just this this song's fine. Like it's a great song in its own right. Comparing it to the rest of the album, though, it's definitely a letdown, just by a hair. And that's even including the previous track, Mouth Mantra. But yeah, this song is just, it's just fine for me.
I'm probably a little higher on this song than you are. Obviously, it's not my top anything. Because I will agree, execution wise, it's kind of alright. I do agree that the trap beat does provide a nice element of funk and sort of like the typical trip hop that, like you say, Death Grips was known for, or maybe even Sleigh Bells if you want to go that route. And this is another song which I did look up was older than The Breakup. Because this song, I believe, according to Genius, was from 2011. So this is like the oldest song on the album, writing-wise. Yet, for some weird reason, it actually kind of works to me as far as being part of the narrative, more so than Mouth Mantra, honestly. Because even though it was written before the breakup, there's notes of it throughout, particularly the notes about her trying to sort of maintain a family unit. I think there's like parallels between the issues she was having with her mother's illness, and then you could compare that to sort of the fallout that she had with Barney and the daughter. There was a daughter, right? Okay, good. And she's basically realizing that if not for motherly instinct that sort of is either taught or comes naturally, that she may not be here because her mother might have sort of derailed that whole, lineage without, having Björk. And in the same way, Björk may have not had her daughter if not for, sort of having that motherly instinct or to have that family instinct, which, again, does come across a little heartbreaking because of how it disintegrated earlier on the album. I think this is a stronger closer in that narratival sense. It's not essentially a letdown for me in that regard. Again, the execution's kind of bland, all things considered, considering the way that Adam Dance and Black Lake and Knockout are just knockouts. But this one's fine too. Like, I think I'm higher on it lyrically, but musically, about the same. It's fine.
You want to know what else is fine, man?
What is that?
The fact that we finished up Vulnicura, and now that we did that, we could say those sweet words, man.
We did it.
We did it, man. We got a wound. We discovered what it feels like to heal that wound.
Vive Iceland.
So, I'm going to go first with my overall thoughts and ratings here. So, it was an absolute pleasure revisiting this album. Vulnicura, it came into a moment in my life where I was really expanding my musical taste, and now that I've fully, I don't want to say fully expanded, because like I'm ever expanding my taste, let's be real, we're legitimately doing this show for me to expand my musical taste for one reason or another.
Right.
But, yeah, just for me to revisit it after going through, just so much in my life, I got married, got a house, went through a pandemic, just so much of my life. And for me to, come back to this record after so many years, it was an absolute treat. This is a masterclass in human expression. Like the way that Björk bleeds into the album is absolutely breathtaking. Like, there was moments here, like I told you, in Lion Song, where it just seems like she's throwing herself into the music and just trying to fuse her spirit into it. For that, oh my goodness, it's an absolute treat for me. And I've actually started to listen to more Björk because of this record, and diving into Vespertine, Homogenic. Probably check out a couple more albums here in the near future. But the use of strings, vocals, and the drum machine acting as Björk's heart and emotions, it's a fantastic palette that this album operates within. Songs like Black Lake, Adam Dance, Stone Milker, Not Get, even Family. I legitimately named over half the album here so far are great examples of how her range as a composer and a musician are. Unfortunately, though, some of the songs don't keep up the intensity, though. Like I mentioned, Mouth Mantra, does does bring down the intensity a little bit, and then Quicksand. It's not a bad song, but it's a bit of a letdown compared to like what the rest of the album was bringing to the table. But I can't ignore like how much I really did enjoy this record, so I'm landing at a beefy 9.5 out of 10.
That is beefy. That is beefy. So this record was a bit of a challenge for me because, again, you know me. I am a sucker for the big beat. I'm a sucker for conventionalism in a sense. So coming into this record, I had no idea what the hell to expect. But I do come away with it with a strong appreciation for Björk, because even if you are not a fan of unconventional, more avant-garde music, I mean, there's a lot to like about it. It almost feels like this album could be its own musical in a sense. Not like in a, again, traditional musical sense with, the big choruses and whatnot, the hooks. Figured I'd get my own SpongeBob reference in there. So it feels like a show you'd see where, there's a lot of interpretive dancers, and sort of a focal point that's more or less sort of presenting these words in a poetic sense. And that's what I'm reminded most of is poetry when listening to this album. The lyrics throughout are great. The music throughout ranges from okay to great. You mentioned Black Lake, you mentioned Knockout. I think those songs are fantastic. Again, sometimes like with Lion Song or Family, it does great a little bit and get a little too avant-garde for my taste. But if someone were to ask me, should I listen to this album, my answer would be yes, because there are strong moments on it, and I think overall it is a grand introduction to Björk as a songwriter, composer, and singer. I am going to grade a little bit on a curve because, again, this is not quite my thing per se, but I did enjoy it for the most part. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
So, collectively, you gave it an 8. I gave it a
9.5.
0.5. Oh, what does that equal out on math?
I believe that comes out to a 8.75 out of 10.
That is a beefy number, man.
That's a beefy number.
Not as quite as beefy as like other numbers that we've given out there, but like considering like what Björk is, I would consider that a beefcake.
Oh, it's a beef. It's a beefy cake.
Yeah. So for me, next album recommendation. So I could have went with FKA Twigs' LP1, but since I started to dive a little bit more into Björk, I'm going to go with a Björk record.
There you go.
I'm going to go with Vespertine. It was between that or Homogenic, but I feel like Vespertine leans more into the melodic side of Björk as compared to like the atonal, maybe like experimental side of Homogenic. So yeah, excellent, beautiful record. Easy recommendation for me. So if you've enjoyed Vulnicura by Björk, check out Vespertine, her 2001 record.
And my recommendation, I had a hard time with this one. I was actually going to suggest that you preluded my own prediction when you mentioned Eve's Tumor at the top of this review. But I'm not going to go with that record. I'm going to go with another record we reviewed probably about a year and a half ago at this point, one of our earlier episodes. And that is For the First Time by Black Country New Road. And the reason I'm choosing that album is for the lyrical parallels, the confessional nature between that EP and this album, which I think goes deep and dark. And then the music, too, is not necessarily conventional either. Like, it's more conventional than this, but it's definitely something that when you hear it, you'll be like, what did I just listen to, and why do I like it so much? So yeah, For the First Time, a Black Country New Road is my recommendation based off of Vulnicura.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you experience or you have experienced Vulnicura by Björk and you are looking to where to go to next based on our recommendations, I recommend Vespertine by Björk, and Matthew James Durzik recommends For the First Time by Black Country New Road.
Yes, and a strong recommendation on your part for those who may have not heard that episode. Go check that out.
Yeah, it was a fun episode, man. So yeah, now that we put Björk to bed and basically said, hey, enjoy Iceland over there. There's one other thing we have to do before we kick this review into bed.
Yes, there is, and as I mentioned to you before the end of our Jagged Little Pill episode, this week you're not getting a choice. So I went with the same formula you did for the first 2 reviews of this month. Which was go with something older and now something newer. For those who aren't fully aware of our back catalog, in 2024, there were a pair of albums that we talked about last year that were considered to be from at least one perspective. I want to say it was at least the Today Show. There may have been other perspectives in other publications. That labeled the artists behind them the Big Three. We talked about Brat from Charlie XCX, and we talked about Short and Sweet from Sabrina Carpenter. And in the back of my mind, I thought that there was some unfinished business in that reign. So, you could probably guess where I'm going with what I'm about to say.
Are you about to join the Pink Pony Club?
We are going to discover the royalty that is The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess by one Chappell Roan.
So, I don't think I'm adequately prepared to, do that review. I might have to bring a guest on for next week, if that's okay with you.
That is okay with me, and you may be the only one, because I know if I bring my guest to review that album, she will I was about to say to strangle. She's not going to be very thrilled about it.
I welcome it, okay?
Oh, I do too. I do too.
But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not checked out The Rise and Fall of Midwest Princess by one Chappell Roan, make sure you check that out. That way you can have opinions about opinions that me and Matt are going to be bringing to the table for next week's review. So,
yeah.
Man, we've ran the gamut here with a Women's History Month here so far. We've done Alanis Morissette, we've done Cyndi Lauper, now we've done Björk, and next week we're going to be doing Chappell Roan, man.
I know, we are going through the ranges of female musical history when it comes to the stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, but I'm glad that, for the most part, I was a little higher on the Björk record than you were.
Right.
But I'm glad that, we were able to, for the most part, synchronize our feelings.
Amen.
And you know what I propose now?
What's that?
An Adam dance.